So it's really nice to be able to bring it online for all of you. So I'm not going to tell you too much about myself to start with, because I'm going to do that a little bit later in today's session as if I'm being interviewed, because sometimes it's nice to display what you would like people to do. So I'll have a go at doing that, and you guys can maybe give me a score out of 10. But it's certainly really nice to be here. We'll be here together so tonight and the following 2 Thursdays. And what I've hoped to do is cover everything that I would when I'm coaching somebody one-on-one in an intensive way, leading up to those interviews, which I know for some of you are 3 or 4 weeks away, some of you are 2 months away, which is just perfect timing. What I'm also going to do is part of my background is as an educator. So I know that coming to a didactic lecture type thing doesn't work. That doesn't allow you as learners to learn much. So I will be giving you homework, just little bits, but I think it'll be really tailored to what you need to be practicing anyway. What I find is when people meet me and are prepping for an interview is that they're really clever and have a great level of experience and great things to show. And they're actually really happy to work really hard for their interview because it's very important to them. But often they don't really know what work to do and how to kind of follow a plan leading up to the interview. So what I hope to do is incorporate that plan in the next couple of weeks. So you'll have a little bit of homework after today to help us prepare for next time. But also I'll be giving you a written plan after week 3. So that you can follow that as well for the next couple of weeks leading up to your interview. For anyone who feels like they need that sooner, you're welcome to let me know during the session in the chat, and I can get that to you sooner. But I guess I'll be really holding your hand for the next 3 weeks and learning all about you, which I'm really excited about. So before I say anything more about myself or get you guys talking, which I promised to do, and I'm glad everyone's microphone is working, is I wanted to tell you a little bit of a story. And I guess bear with me, but this will then link back to what we're doing over the next 3 weeks. So I guess this story, which is shown by the 2 pictures on the screen, is about a research project that was done about 10 years ago, where some researchers purchased 100 items from op shops. They were allowed to spend about $1 on each, and in fact, these 100 items, there was $1.25 spent per item on average. So it's all weird, wacky, wonderful things that you would see in op shops. The 2 items here are like a mug with a logo on it, but the logo is upside down, which is a bit strange, but something that you'd probably see in an op shop. And also on the right is the golf ball money box. So the idea was they bought these 100 items for about $1 each. But then they asked some well-known writers to write a story about each of them. So it might have been that the mug belonged to somebody really important at that university, and they drank it at that place at that time, drank from it at that place at that time, and then it ends up, being up for auction on eBay for this reason. So they gave a story behind each of these 100 objects. If you're really interested, you can look at what those stories are, but you probably just believe me that they were pretty quirky. They then listed those items for auction on eBay, and the 100 items sold for a total of just over $8,000. And I think it's like obviously a bit of a kooky experiment that I'm sure somebody has now turned into a PhD. But I think the idea of sharing that story with you is that the next 3 weeks is really about the art of storytelling. And what I mean by that is you guys are all brilliant and you have lots of great experience and stories, whether they're patient stories or stories about a great research project you did or a great team you were in, stories about an example of leadership from you. And we really need to pull those stories out of you so that the interview panel can recognize what your strengths are. And I think that's what moves you from what I like to call a Google answer or perhaps a textbook answer, which is probably the stage that you're all at. A pretty good answer. You've covered the points. But what we want to move you towards is this story where I really believe you and I can see you in theatre or operating the patient or counselling a patient or working in a multidisciplinary team. So I really believe you. Everyone tells me they have great communication skills and great teamwork, but I need to believe you, and a story is the way that you allow that to be shown. So there's my little story to tell you that we're going to talk a lot about you guys, and I want to know details and specifics over the next couple of weeks. Has anyone else been able to join us? Ashi? Feel free to interrupt if they do so that we can make sure they feel welcome. So my plan for the next 3 weeks is tonight we're going to talk about really what are your best cards. And I know a lot of you would have reflected on that in the pre-reading. We're going to talk about some frameworks. Some of you will have heard of these frameworks before. Some of you, they'll be vague acronyms in the back of your mind. Some of you will have used them. But what I really love to do is go through these frameworks, use them, show how they can be used really well, because I am convinced after about 6 years of interview coaching that these frameworks work. They work for specialty training programs. They work for fellowship interviews. They work for permanent job interviews. They work in medical interviews and elsewhere. So I really want you to be convinced and understand how to best use the frameworks. We're going to go into then one of the first frameworks, which is quite common, which is called CAMP. And that's where the interview panel would usually say something like, tell me about yourself. So that's my plan for tonight. Over the next couple of weeks, we're then going to cover the other types of questions that you generally get asked in a medical interview and how you can best approach them. So I want you to finish this series with a real toolkit that you can take into the interview and really get yourself and who you are across to the panel. So I thought I'd just quickly set some ground rules, and what I'm going to do is set one ground rule, which is my rule, which is that you must interact. So you must try, and I know it's difficult, I know it's hard online, I know this is nerve-wracking stuff, but I really want you just to try and let your guard down in this really safe space that hopefully we're going to create for you, and really give it a go. You'll all be called upon to have a go at some of the questions, and I'll try and make sure that there's equal chances for everyone to have a go, and you'll get feedback. But what we might do is I want everyone just to check that they can actually use their chat. So if you can write into the chat box one other ground rule, go for it. This is my way of making you interact so that then I can make you keep doing that the whole time. And we all know the rules. So pop it in there. And Mariko, yes, that's totally fine. I can get that to you sooner. I'll just write a little note for myself. What's the rules for the next 3 weeks, team? You're going to do your homework. Don't worry, Rose, I'll talk about it. Is it who are you? You're asking me who I am? Is that what that means? I can't hear. Hi, Linda. Great. Everyone make sure you type a rule or something in there so we know it's working. Participating, brilliant. Thanks, Rose. I am being very rude and not telling you too much about myself just yet. So it works on the phone, homework. Go and do your homework, Sarah. That's your contract signed that you're going to do your homework for me. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Is anyone having trouble with the chat? Do you want to flag me if you're having trouble? Great. Please feel free to write anything into the chat anytime, and also unmute yourself and write into the chat anytime. But pop your videos on if you like. It's really good for us to be able to see you. I think there's a couple of people hidden. Thank you. Awesome. So what I'm going to do now is we really want to meet everyone. This is only going to take a couple of minutes because what I want to know from you really specifically is who are you? So what your name is, where you're working. Tell us what interview you have coming up, when it is, and what specialty or program that it's for. Then we're going to move. I also want you to tell me about, so this is some of the homework that you hopefully have done now that it's a ground rule, which is how do you come across in an interview? So part of the pre-reading for the series was to find out from your husband or friend or colleague how you might come across in an interview. That might be serious or funny, or you smile too much, or you're nervous. How do you think you would be perceived, which is a really important part of being interviewed. Lastly, what are 2 things that you want the panel to know about you? And you are not allowed to say that you're a good communicator and that you're a good team player. I want to know specific things. It might be that you've had 5 years experience in your area, or that you have 10 peer-reviewed publications, or that you are really passionate about teaching. I want to know specific things, 2 things. I'm sure there's more than 2. There's usually like 3 or 4 really great things that people need to get across. But if you can just tell me 2 in your intro. So what I'm going to do is start with Mariko. If you can give that a go. Can you unmute yourself and tell us?
Yep. So I'm Mariko. I'm a locum psychiatry registrar currently working in Ballarat, and I'm applying to the psychiatry training program in South Australia. My interview is actually in between the second and third session, which is a bit frustrating. But, so I apparently would likely come across quite passionate, competent, knowledgeable, and I'm quite talkative generally. So though my nerves do get the better of me sometimes in those situations, so I can kind of go one way or the other and either talk too much or not enough. And the 2 main things for me is I have 3 years experience working as a psychiatry registrar, so I know how to do the job I'm applying for. And I have an interest in system development and processes, and I've worked in roles that have been working with teams that have just started, so getting to do looking at how we fit in the service and negotiating a lot of the political or diplomatic aspects of that as well.
Great. Excellent. I'm going to make comments, and these are things that people should take through all of their interviews. And I know I'll always let you know when you're meant to be role-playing, and you definitely weren't meant to be role-playing there. So thank you for going first. And that was lovely, exactly what you were meant to do. So thanks for joining us. Brilliant. I love the experience. And every time you guys refer to any experience that you've got in interviews, make sure you quantify it, just like Mariko did then. So 3 years. It might be that you've spent 10 months here or 3 years here or, 8 years or 5 years as a doctor, but 3 as a psych reg. That kind of information is really important. The other thing you did is pick something really different, I think, which was really good about your systems development. And what I think would be even better is every time you talk about that, and perhaps you would have planned to do this in an interview anyway, but I want a specific example. So you kind of almost got there and you left this mystery, like what are you talking about? What have you had to sort? Can you tell me what it was that you were referring to, or even one of the examples where you had to deal with this systems change and this political environment?
Yeah, so I am at the moment working with the ART team, so the acute response team, which is a type of crisis team that hasn't existed in Ballarat for well over a decade. And so the current teams that are there don't really understand what we do, how we fit, and negotiating some of the misunderstandings of that in a way that we're as useful to the service as possible, while also everyone has a specific area that they manage, has been challenging.
Great.
And we're also trying to make sure that we're developing good processes for referrals and for working amongst the teams within the service.
Yeah. So now do we all believe her that she works in system development and can conquer that stuff? I feel like just telling that little 20-second story makes it even more believable that you're doing it. And now some of us can probably connect with what you've talked about. We've seen or worked with an acute response team before. So just adding that detail whenever you're talking about your systems development work is going to be a really great thing for you. Thank you. Linda, you're up next on my list.
Hi, I'm Linda. I'm an intern from Adelaide. And the interview, I have applied for basic physician training. So I'm planning to apply for basic physician training, planning to start for next year, 2022. In regards to how I might come across in an interview, perhaps a bit serious or maybe a bit nervous, perhaps a bit maybe on the side of serious. Two things the panel would like to know about me. I guess my passion to be in continuous professional development and interest in research. And also leadership skills and, being an advocate for the patients and also for the colleagues,
Great. Excellent. Thank you. A lot of people say serious. That's the most common answer I hear. And you know what? That's pretty normal because this is serious stuff. It's really important. This interview is important to you. So, you know, you should be serious. But I think sometimes it is about connecting with people as well. So, you know, I've worked with people before where we literally had to set a timer and say, okay, give them a bit of a smile. Every time the timer went off, let's do a bit of a smile, you know. Bringing yourself in, telling stories. So an example is somebody I was working with this week who was reflecting on how they might help a team member in trouble or a team member who is struggling. And as part of their answer, they were talking about a few hypotheticals. So it might be that this team member is really tired. It might be that they have a new baby or a new dog. This person that I was talking to has recently had a new puppy. And for anyone who's had a new puppy or knows anyone who's had a new puppy, it's pretty exhausting. Just like those people amongst us who have children or have nephews or nieces, we know, we've seen what people have been through with how exhausting that can be. So adding those hypotheticals and connect, and you know, the way she talked about this new dog of hers, CJ, and how she'd been through that, and perhaps that was what, you know, that could be what was going on with her colleague as a way of connecting. And it also just shows that really human side. So when I think that same thing that I've talked about earlier, when you feel quite serious, it's about really just talking about yourself, making little smiles, and even when you're having to say something that sounds a bit wanky about yourself, because that's a bit of what interviewing is, just kind of giving yourself a bit of a giggle to say, oh, you know, I actually have had 3 years experience as an occupational therapist before medicine, so I'm always thinking about falls risk. You know, if you say it in that light, it just allows you to tell them even more about yourself. That might be a hard thing to otherwise get across. Sarah, I want to hear about you, please.
Hello, did that work? I'm muting audio.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Well done.
It looked like it was loading for a bit. So my name's Sarah. I am a dermatology unaccredited reg at the Royal Brisbane, and I have a dermatology interview coming up on the 21st, 22nd weekend of August, and it's an online interview. So I'm actually really happy that this is online because I get to practice looking at the camera. Yes. I did ask a few people how I come across in an interview. One person said serious, and another said genuine and likable. And I suppose my own thought about how I've done previously in interviews is I get very talkative, I talk too fast, and get very flappy with my hands. So I need to be mindful of that. And the 2 things I think I would like the panel to know about me would be, firstly, I'm really quite passionate about still maintaining a connection between internal medicine and dermatology. I was a basic physician trainee for a year last year, in between some experience in dermatology in my second year out, and now again this year. And I really find critically ill dermatology patients, so like the sick ones in ICU with a rash all over their body and their skin falling off, fascinating. So I'm working hard at the moment in my team to continue the connection between my internal medicine colleagues, a lot of whom are my friends that I went through training last year with, and in dermatology, so that we're sort of always talking about common patients. And I have presented at Grand Rounds recently in an effort to continue that connection. And secondly, I have quite a lot of experience in teamwork and leadership outside of work that I bring back into work. I've been playing netball for 20 years, and the last 10 in the State League in Queensland. And for about 5 of those years, I've been captain of the team. So it's been my job to lead through the State League, and sometimes we've had wins. I think it's actually harder being the captain when you lose, but I suppose continuing through that, and I hope to continue playing, and that helps me in my work life as well.
Absolutely. Brilliant. So many good things that you've been able to bring in, even though we're not role playing that answer. So thank you so much, Sarah. I just want to say 2 things. I could say 100. 2 things. One is even how you told us about the grand rounds that you've presented. So it's like proof. So it's not just that you're passionate about this internal medicine and dermatology relationship, but you got into the nitty gritty of an example of how you do that, how you advocate for that. The other thing, and this is simple, but what you did is you said secondly. So you told me you were going to tell me 2 things, and then you said firstly and then secondly. So that's really good language in the interview to really guide them through. That's what us interview people like to call signposting. So really, like, I'm going to tell you 3 things. The first thing is, the second thing is, the third thing is. In summary, the 3 things were. You probably just did that naturally, Sarah, but that's really good for everyone to pick up on when they're answering. I know we're not role playing, but it's just this everyday communication, isn't it? But it's like on steroids and really uncomfortable.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Brookie, can I just add in there that's important, as sometimes being an interviewer, when you interview people, they're all over the shop and you're getting confused and it's very tangential, and for you to have a structure can calm your nerves, but also as an interviewer, it can make the process of having the assessment sheet right in front of you and knowing, okay, tick, 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 they're going through a logical order. So much nicer to interview someone. So, there might even end up being a little bit of a cognitive bias there, as in, she maybe wasn't necessarily better than the person who interviewed before her, but her structure was great, her flow was great, and therefore she's probably a better candidate.
And I actually think it just allows them to hear you. It allows them to hear your really good points. So I always think of interviewing as, do you remember when we were back at uni and the lecturer would say, the next slide would be a really good exam question. And we'd all be like, like getting our phones out, taking a photo. Like, it's that signposting. I am about to say something really important. That's what you're saying to the interview panel. So you're like, you could not be, hold their hand anymore to lead them through where you're going. And if someone, when I'm interviewing people and someone says I've got 3 priorities, I will write on my marking sheet 1, 2, 3, and I will wait for them. So then I'm waiting for each of them and I'm going to write down the headers as you go. Cool. Rose, tell us about your vaccinating days, but no, everything else as well, please.
Hi. Is that on? Is that working?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, great. Hi, I'm Rose. At the moment, I'm working in a COVID-19 vaccination clinic down in the South Coast, in Ulladulla. I've just achieved fellowship in the from the RACGP last year, but I'm looking to change into public health. I do have a passion for public health. So the job ads have just been released, so I don't have interviews at the moment, but I do plan to be applying to quite a few of them. How do I come across in an interview? I was told a few things. So amiable, approachable, competent, and knowledgeable. However, I think my weaknesses are that I can come across as a little bit all over the place, partly due because sometimes I do freeze mentally if I'm thrown something I wasn't expecting or I don't know an answer to a particular question.
Yeah.
So then I do tend to come across all over the place, basically.
Yeah.
The 2 things that I want the panel to know that I think I'd probably stand out amongst other candidates. One is that I have extensive clinical experience across multiple specialties. So I've had about 12 years clinical experience in paediatrics, emergency medicine, and general practice, including experience amongst a very large variety of patient groups. So I do tend to I pretty much can work with anyone. And the other thing is I am very interested in research and the very technical aspects of public health medicine. I have done a little bit of clinical research. In my year at the Children's Hospital, I contributed to 2 research projects there. I did I published a paper from my honours year in medicine, and but nothing. I haven't done anything recently, but yeah, I do have that analytical side to me as well.
Excellent. Thank you. So much good stuff, Rose. What I want to say is this all over the place is really common, and also the freezing is really common. So I think the answer, or something that will help with feeling all over the place, is frameworks, because you just know exactly where you're going. You, in fact, tell them where you're going to go, and then you know exactly where you're going, and that'll help to keep you on track. It stops us getting tangential, like Ash said, and like Sarah said, that really like talking too much about one area. We've only got 2.5 to 3 minutes usually for a good interview answer, so we really want to keep on track. The other thing about freezing, and, we've all been thrown that curveball. Sometimes it's not even the stem of the question. It's just like a backup question. And you think, like, it's like a hit in the face. You think, it's okay to say, in normal life, if somebody said that to you, you go, just let me think about it for a second. And it's okay to say that. I feel like we think that these rules in normal communication, the way we might talk with our friends, don't apply in an interview. But in fact, they do. If you're not sure what they say, sorry, can I clarify? If you need a minute to think about it, just say, sorry, I'm just going to take a few seconds to think about this. And then put your head down, stop thinking about them, and just try and, the first minute, the first 2 seconds, you might be thinking, shit. And then you have 15 seconds to just get your head together and think about where you might go. It's also okay to say, would you like me to talk more about that? So I always think, I'm a pharmacist, I always think about warfarin counselling. So there might be a patient that's got 100 things going on, and one of the really important things I need to do is counsel them on warfarin. But in an interview, I'm not going to spend 5 minutes talking about all the counselling points on warfarin. But a good line is, I would counsel the patient on warfarin. Would you like me to talk about the main points that I would cover? The interview panel will say, no, that's not what we're looking for. And then you can leave it. They know you know it, and you can go back to what you were going on to. So I think lots of great things you picked up. When you talk about your 12 years clinical experience, Rose, I want you to be able to say 5 years in pediatrics, 3 years in general medicine, 7 years here. Be really specific. So even more specific than you were. 12 does sound great to me, but I really want to know that, you didn't just 6 months in peds, 4 years of that was peds. That's really beautiful stuff that you're bringing forward. So thank you. I know that we're spending time on this, but this is really so many pearls in just the way that we're chatting about ourselves. So hopefully you're able to all take these tips on board. Flick, what about you? Oh, can't hear you, Flick.
Sorry, is that working now?
Yes, well done.
Oh my God, sorry. Good back to doing this on Zoom. So I'm Felicity, I'm from Townsville, and I'm applying for the pediatric program, which is on the 10th of August. I've had 7 months experience in pediatrics over both Townsville and the Cairns Hospital, so both regional towns. And the two things that I would like people to know about me, the first one is that I do try to look for improvements within the workplace, and that's why I completed an audit on the wellbeing of doctors within the pediatric department to work out what improvements can be made, and also helps advocate for a maternity clinic for the pediatric residents to ensure that the babies that we were discharging were being adequately followed up. And the second thing is that I truly try to advocate for patients, and that includes small things like finding out when their birthdays are, and making sure that if their birthday's in hospital, that we do try and make sure they've got time to leave with the family, and talking to the family about how we can make sure that their birthday is a pleasurable experience, even if they do happen to be stuck in hospital.
Great, thank you. And I feel like maybe it's getting easier as we go down the line, but that was lots of specific stuff with really specific examples, and I think everyone smiled when you talked about the kids' birthdays. So really, really good. Thank you so much. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, Hannah.
I was doing an interview that come across as nervous.
Oh, yeah, nervous?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So again, those frameworks will help. We can't get rid of the nerves altogether. There's no magic pill, but if you have the frameworks and, your examples in this pocket of yours that you're going to take into the interview, then it will really help. And what about you, Hannah?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, thank God. So I'm Hannah. I'm PGY 4 now. I'm one of the residents at the Townsville Hospital. I've applied to the anaesthetic pathway, waiting to hear if I've got an interview. Probably not, because I haven't heard yet, but I live in hope. So I guess things that I would want the interviewers to know is I guess firstly that I do have a fair bit of experience, total of 6 months anaesthetics resident placement, 6 months of ED placement as a resident, and I've done a total of 8 months of rural placements in 3 different sites. So I feel like I've got a fair sort of range of experience there.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing is I am developing a strong interest in doctors' wellbeing. Sort of noticed we've had some issues in Townsville recently and just personal issues that I feel like there's a lot more we can do for our staff.
Right.
So that's sort of an emerging area of interest, I guess you could say. In terms of interviews, I'd probably come across quite nervous and fidgety because I hate being put on the spot and everyone looking at me. So that's probably my big thing to work on.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Have you got an example of something that you've done in that wellbeing space yet, or is that sort of too new to have an example?
It's new. I think I'm noticing a lot of the issues, but I don't really have any solutions as such. It's an area I want to become more involved in.
Yeah, sure. So maybe it's about, and hopefully there is an interview for you for anaesthetics, but, before the interview, maybe it's about connecting with somebody like Ash at the Townsville Hospital and working out, even just being able to talk about like a preliminary plan or something that you guys are thinking about doing. So it's sort of like you've moved from the identification stage to like, this is what I think would really work. And I've put some thought into that, read some literature around junior doctor wellbeing, seen some programs that have worked well at other hospitals. You don't have to have done anything, but even that if you're along the path, it's a lot more impressive than like, I can see this issue. So maybe have a think about that, because it sounds like you and Ash could connect. See, there's homework. You two get together.
Brooke, can I ask a question about Hannah's examples? Because I know Hannah from the hospital, yes. And I also know a lot about the hospital environment and what we do at Townsville. And when she said she's done 8 months of rural experience, that is actually in a hospital which has a lot of exposure to emergency and anaesthetics. So instead of just going and working in a rural hospital, I think Hannah was probably exposed to a lot of anaesthetic skills in that hospital. Would you say, Hannah? And my question then would be is, if the interviewers know about the rural hospital in their area and know what the rural hospital offers, should Hannah be explicit in saying, and I also was exposed to a lot of anaesthetics experience at the such and such hospital, or is it assumed that they would know that?
I think nothing should be assumed. You should always say it. Even if you're literally talking to somebody that you know knows, I think you still need to say it in an interview. And I often say to people, so I'm not a doctor, I'm a pharmacist, I'm a PhD doctor, which doesn't really count when somebody's having a heart attack on a plane. But I think it's really good to pretend that you're talking to somebody like me who gets it, but isn't a doctor. And I don't know necessarily, that's kind of the level you've got to pitch to, not like your old next door neighbour level, but just somebody who kind of gets it but needs some explanation. So yeah, I think that's a really great point, Ash. Spell it out. You can't be clear enough. And it's just reminding them as well, even if they do know. Is there anyone else online that's joined us? Have Olivia or Marwan joined us, Ash?
No, they haven't. I've emailed them, but
no worries. That's fine. So hopefully lots of pearls in there. I think what we've talked about is being specific. I think we have talked about giving really great examples, which you guys have done. And I hope that some of those fears about feeling like flippy or too talkative or not ordered or all over the place, I think the frameworks are going to help. So let's move towards them. Is there anyone?
Marwan just joined actually. So I'm just going to turn Marwan's video and audio on.
Awesome.
I don't know if Marwan's been sitting there for the whole session. No, I've been checking.
You've been checking, Ash.
Hi, Marwan. Hopefully, just get started. Keep going, Brooke, because Marwan's still awaiting approval, and it looks like I might have to type in the chat box, Marwan. So, Marwan, I know you're there online, and your audio might not be working properly, so I'm just going to type in the chat box to get you started. Okay.
Great. So before we get into the frameworks, I just want to talk for just 2 slides about applications. And I know a lot of you have applied or already got interviews. Some of you are not at that stage yet, but I think this stuff is really important. This is not a workshop on applications, but these are just some key things that I've noticed from reading hundreds of applications. My main points for CV writing are to only use a template if the position that you are applying for gives you one. What I find is that often for like RMO positions, there'll be a template, and then some people hold on to that template every time they apply for a new job, and it looks a bit strange. So get rid of that template, make your own template. And if you want an example template, I'm also happy to email you one. So just flick me an email. Make sure you quantify and explain everything. I think you should assume that it's going to be an admin officer who has no experience in your specialty or your area, who's going to do the first read of your CV and start scoring you. When people do a good job of scoring people off their CVs, there is a really distinct score checklist, and then they're just scoring you off that. So if things don't fit into their checklist, you're not going to get points for it. A good example of that is courses that you've been to. You need to usually talk about what the course was and be really clear about if it was like a 1-hour course or a 3-day course. There's big differences in the scores that you might get for that. So anything that you can quantify and explain, do so. Your CV should be roughly 3 to 4 pages in length. Of course, that depends on position, but there's often if your CV is 1.5 to 2 pages, unless they have asked for 2 pages, it needs to be longer just to make sure that you're getting everything across. Don't use acronyms. This is maybe a pet peeve, but don't use acronyms unless you're going to use it at least 5 times and it's written out for correctly the first time. I read a lot of CVs and give feedback on a lot, and what I find is that people have used this acronym the entire time, but then on the last page or the last line, it will all of a sudden say the acronym in full. So just the first time you use an acronym, write it out properly, put the acronym in brackets afterwards and use that acronym thereafter. Also check your socials. Part of recruitment is often doing a Google search of people. And if we can find awful photos, maybe you've got like an anti-vax picture on your social media, which I'm sure none of you do. Terrible example, but that might be something that comes up that puts your... The other thing I think, moving on from your CV, is just towards the end of your CV, of course, you ask for 2 references or 3 references usually. You've got to pick the right people and do the work for them. And I'll just show you on the next slide what I mean. This is perhaps why I first, maybe one of the, this person who applied for dermatology a really long time ago in 2016 was somebody who I was the referee for them when they first applied, and perhaps that was something that really stuck with me because it was the start of my coaching journey. But what she did is wrote me an email, and the email said, "Thank you. I know you can't read that email, but you can read what's on the green. Thank you. This email contains everything you need to know if you're contacted as a referee." The email told me when I should expect a call, and it gave me a link to the general overview of the selection process, but she had also then plucked out the parts that she thought might be relevant. So she had a list of the areas that she was assessed against to get onto the dermatology training program, and she'd included dot point examples of evidence for each. She attached everything, her application and her CV, but also then offered to take me out for a coffee afterwards. So when I got that email, the point of me telling you that about what she did for me is I just thought, oh my gosh, if I get a phone call, I have to do a really good job for her. I knew I could bring up that email and literally whatever they asked me, I would be able to say, oh yeah, well, she had this, this, and this, and her last publication was this, and this is her teaching experience. And I might not have known all of that about her. Usually your referee knows a lot about one part of your practice, but they might not realize that, Mariko, that you've got this systems development side of you, or there's other people that have done lots of research, or the public health stuff for you, Rose, all of that really, those 2 key cards of yours, they might not even know all of that. So it's really great to put it all into an email or let them know.
And also on that point, Brooke, assume your referees will get called. So there's not many places that I've done an interview for or been a interviewee with that haven't spoken to my referees, or at least sent a pro forma for a referee to fill in. So the more the referee knows about you, the better. If you put down a referee that you haven't worked with in 2 years, they're not going to be able to say much about you if you've not given them some recent evidence of what you've been doing. So, and the other thing is, referees are often busy. They're often referees for multiple people. So also don't just assume they're going to sit down and read your CV from start to end as well. They hopefully should, but if they don't, it's probably a good idea to also jot in there some dot points about what you've been up to in the last 4 to 6 months if you've not worked with them in that time.
Thank you, Ash. Excellent. So the frameworks, the first framework I'm going to introduce you to, and this sounds really basic, but it's really, really important, is this beginning, middle, end. So if we think back to like year 7 when we were writing 1-page stories, it always had a beginning, a middle, and an end, as should your interview question. And
Brooke, sorry for interrupting. Marwyn and Olivia have just both joined us.
Oh, hello, Marwyn and Olivia. How are you?
Hey, very good, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't get from work on time, so
That's okay.
We can hear you okay, so that's all that matters, Marwyn. So I'm going to turn your mic off for the time being, and when Brooke's ready to ask you some questions, we'll turn it back on. And Olivia, hello.
Me too. I'm so sorry for being late.
That's fine. I've recorded it, so we've only been going for the first 40 minutes. So I'll send you the recordings tomorrow so you can go over the first 40 minutes. I'll turn your mic off and we'll continue on.
Please, thank you.
Great. So the first framework that you're going to use for any interview question, absolutely all of them, is a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I'll just talk through what that means because it seems pretty obvious, but people don't do it well. The beginning is what us interview people like to call speed dating or a motherhood statement. And that is where you tell them what you're about to tell them. So you kind of get the interview panel comfortable in their seat. It's like signposting where you're going and how you're going to approach this question. I'll give you an example. A really basic interview question that is often asked is, tell me about a time that you worked in a great team. So a really good beginning or motherhood statement might be, I have had experience in working in great teams, both personally and professionally. The team I would really like to tell you about today is a team that I worked in the dermatology outpatients clinic, a multidisciplinary team that I worked in the dermatology outpatients clinic. So I haven't really given them much content, but they know where I'm going. So then they're ready. They're comfortable in their seats and they're ready to hear you. They've kind of caught up because it's actually really fast-paced being on an interview panel and you're kind of thinking about the last question and where you're going and what your kids are having for lunch and the dog's at the vet. All of this stuff is going on. So if somebody just slows down and tells you how they're going to approach the question, they're then ready to hear it. So I want to hear beautiful motherhood sentences today and the next couple of weeks. Go really broad. I want to give you one more example of a motherhood statement, and that is, if the question is, tell me about a time that you've been involved in conflict. A really good motherhood statement is to say, fortunately, I haven't had many opportunities or many conflictuous events in my professional life. The example I'd like to tell you about today is when I had a differing opinion from a midwife that I worked with in obstetrics, for example. Then we're going to get to the middle. So the middle is like the bulk. It's your real answer. That's the content that has the details and numbers. It has either your story or your approach to how you're going to deal with their scenario. And what we're going to use for the middle is a framework. So we're going to use CAMP, STAR, or SPIES, and I'll talk about a few other approaches, but really CAMP, STAR, and SPIES are the main 3 that you need no matter what your interview looks like. And I have worked with people with all the types of interviews that you guys are preparing for at the moment. So I'm confident that those 3 will work. I'm going to just put that on the shelf for a second and come back to those. But what happens then is you get to the end of the middle. So you've done this STAR, STAR, and you kind of finished, you've said everything, and then you get to the end and you're like, you have this feeling in your throat, and sometimes you make this noise. Like, I'm finished, you're still looking at me, I feel really uncomfortable. That's what that noise means. Sometimes the panel make it even worse and they say, would you like to add anything else? And you think, I've missed something, oh my gosh, I've totally stuffed up this question. But really, they're just being really polite and making sure that they're not cutting you off. They're really just making sure that you are finished. So instead of getting to that awkward part of an interview, what you should do then, rather than a nervous laugh, is tell them what I call an in-summary statement, where you tell them what you told them. So in summary, the team that I worked in, the multidisciplinary team in outpatient dermatology that I worked in, was a great team because we communicated well and had a shared goal for our patients. You just summarize what you've just said. Pick out your main points. You don't want to add any new content. If you start adding new content there, you need to then in summary again. You need to wrap it up again. The in summary statement should just be just wrapping up what you've said. It's like putting the little bow on top of the present. Sometimes it makes it feel even clearer how you've answered the question once you summarize for them. Because sometimes your answers are, complex. It's a complex situation they've given you. Your answers are complex. So when you can just wrap it up in 1 or 2 neat sentences at the end, it'll really punch home what your answer was. It's also a really polite way of saying, I'm finished, next question, please, without saying, next question, please. And, you don't really want that awkward 10 or 15 seconds. You really do want them to move through and tell you what the next question is, because there is a time limit. Interviews are can be quite time restrictive. So you're always going to have a beginning, a middle, and end, and I can't wait to hear that shortly from some of you. So then the main types of questions that you'll get asked and motivating questions. So we'll go into these in more detail, but an example of that might be, tell us about who you are, what are your strengths, where are you going to be in 5 years? These motivating type questions, which are all about you and your broad skill set. The second type is behavioural questions, where they say, tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when you made a mistake, you were involved in conflict, you worked in a great team, you were proud of a patient that you looked after. Those tell me about a time when. The next type is situational questions, where they'll say, this is what's going on. There's a resident, they're struggling, or somebody on your team struggling with workload. How will you help? What would you do? Another example of a situational question is, the boss is drunk. How would you handle it? Or somebody's using a medicine that's not approved for use in pediatrics. How would you handle it? So these situational questions, where they'll give you a situation. These are often clinical, or they're often clinical and something else. So a great orthopedic example is a child with a both bone forearm fracture, but you are worried about domestic violence. There's 2 parts, and you need to deal with the both bone forearm fracture, but you also need to deal with this home situation that needs investigating and it needs looking after. Those are the type of the situational questions that they'll ask you. And then I always think of these other questions as the 3 things questions. So when they say to you, what do you think are the most important considerations for this specialty in the next 10 years, or what is the biggest, what have we learned from COVID? You might just want to have 2 or 3 things up your sleeve on those key topics to talk about. So we're going to talk about all of those in more detail, but they're the main types of questions. Does that sound about right? Maybe I'll get a thumbs up or a nod. Keep you moving. Yeah, perfect. You might be cringing thinking about being asked some of them, but we'll talk about it enough that you're ready. So one of the main ones I want to focus on tonight is this motivating question. And a lot of the interviews that you guys are going for, from my knowledge and experience working with people who've done these type of interviews, is tell us about yourself. Why should we pick you? We're interviewing 40 people today. We're picking 6. Why you? Who are you? What are your strengths? Also about where do you want to be in 5 years? So these types of questions are all about you. And the way that I suggest you answer them is firstly with a motherhood sentence. So your motherhood sentence might sound something like, let's say the question is, tell us about yourself. Your motherhood sentence might sound something like, I believe I have a lot to bring to, to this fellowship position. I would like to explain what I have to bring as far as my clinical experience, my academic experience, my management experience, but also who I am personally. That's your motherhood statement. You've told them what you're about to tell them. And then you break it up. So clinically, who are you? What's your experience clinically? Where have you worked? Like we were saying before, 3 years in pediatrics, 5 years in ED, 7 months in pediatrics, 7 months in anesthetics. Be really clear about what your clinical experience is. If the question is, where do you want to be in 5 years? You should talk about what your clinical experience is and what that links to, where you want to go. It might be that you want to do this really niche fellowship in your area. Talk about where you want to be clinically in 5, 10, 20 years, whatever they've asked you. A is for academic. And academic means 2 things, research and education. They couldn't really put research and education in this acronym, so it's called academic, but I really think you should break it down into research and education. You might have only done a little bit of research, and people worry about that often that I meet. They've only done like a few audits, maybe 1 or 2 peer-reviewed papers. Whatever you've done, it's okay. The idea is being able to talk about your research or quality improvement activities and talk about it in a way that it means that you understand what quality improvement and research is. So it might be that you've done, you've presented two things at conferences. Talk about what one of them is, but really talk about your experience by going through that quality improvement process. You now have experience and an understanding of the importance of translating new ideas through research into practice. None of you are applying for a research job, so you just want to be able to talk about research in a way that you know enough about it for this role. Then teaching, and I know all of you have done teaching. I've seen it on your CVs. Some of you have done just a little bit of formal teaching, but lots of what I think of as informal teaching, looking after students and junior doctors. Some people have done more formal teaching, and you really want to quantify that. Talk about what you've done. If you deliver lectures, give them an example of a lecture that you've recently delivered, or a teaching program that you've recently been involved in. And when you talk about a teaching program, talk about how many people. So you might have delivered a workshop to 20 junior doctors on, respiratory differential diagnosis, something. Be specific about what you've done and how many people, how long it was. I've had somebody who just used to talk about this teaching program that he did. And then when I dug a little bit deeper, it was like a 6-part program that he'd come up with. And, it was really, really impressive. So making sure that you talk about specifically what it is. So academic is education and research. M is for management. Some people have got management experience, and I think you should talk about the type of management experience you've got. It doesn't have to be formal management experience, but if you've been responsible for a team of people, whether it was formal or informal, that's when you can mention it. For some people, you're just going to get rid of the M. At your level, you might not need M, and you might not have experience in management, so just leave that out. You could just do CAP. And then personal, and it is really nice to just speak personally. It might be that you really love a particular area, that you have 2 children, that you're not having children in the next 5 years might be really important for applying for this job. So you might want to say something about, hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years we'll start a family, but definitely not yet. Of course, you can be really tactful in how you think about personal stuff, but talk about I think, Sarah, of course, with your netball experience, I think it was really good that you linked that to work-life balance. Just saying that you really enjoy running or whatever it is that you do. Because, there might be somebody on the panel who also used to live in Ulladulla or has been part of the vaccination program or plays netball or all those things that you guys have already connected with me about. I'm from Townsville, so I've, the fact that you guys are from Townsville, that connects, some of you guys are from Townsville, connects with me. That's where I grew up. So just drop in a few little things you'll never know. Might be fishing, for example, and then the person on the panel loves fishing too. But it does show that you're a normal human as well. They don't want to hire robots. They want to hire people that they can work with, because lots of the clinical stuff may be teachable, but, actually having to be on the team with somebody may not be. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you an example of how I might answer that question, just to really punch this point home, but then I want to hear it from a couple of you. So I want everyone to be prepared. I'm not going to tell you who I'm going to call on, because I want you to use this time to really have your portfolio ready. I want you to write down your answer in dot points now, because then you've done it, even if you don't practice it with me, you'll be ready or almost ready to do that at the interview. So I'm going to give you my answer, and then while I'm doing that, you're welcome to also be writing about you. But let's say I got asked to tell me, Brooke, we're interviewing a lot of people today. Tell us about who you are and what you've got to bring. So, sure. So I guess the way I'd like to answer this question today is to tell you who I am clinically, academically, management-wise, and personally. As far as my clinical experience, I have 10 years experience as a clinical pharmacist across 2 large hospitals, being the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital and Gold Coast Health. Through working at both these large hospitals, I've been able to cover most areas that a clinical pharmacist would serve, such as medicine and surgery, as well as 4 years of experience working in the emergency department. When it comes to my academic experience, really, I guess I can break that down into my education and research experience. As far as education, this is a real passion of mine. I have been a lecturer at the University of Queensland for the final year pharmacy curriculum. I've also worked in a role which is called a clinical educator in pharmacy, where I look after the training of junior pharmacists and pharmacy students as they're transitioning into the workforce. My current role is as a medical education officer in the emergency department at the Gold Coast, and that role allows me to oversee the training and wellbeing of 180 doctors in the emergency department. That role sees me do things on a daily basis, for example, from simulation, where I might be assisting and running a simulation for the registrars in the morning. And in the afternoon, I might be connecting with some junior doctors during their midterm assessment feedback with their supervisor, whereby I've collected some work-based assessments for them and am able to be part of that education and feedback session for the junior doctor. As far as research, just last year, I finished my PhD, where I looked at the impact of pharmacists on post-take ward rounds. So that research, which I am glad to have finally finished, really has seen me have a real keen interest in the way that doctors communicate. As far as my management experience, I have a strange interest in recruitment. I've always really loved recruitment, and I've been in upwards of 50 panels for both pharmacists and medical officers. This interest in recruitment, and I guess trying to get the most out of people in an interview setting so that we pick the right people, has led me to start my own interview coaching business 6 years ago, where I work with doctors one-on-one. Also, I run workshops for doctors when they're preparing for really big interviews that they've got to advance their careers. Personally, I've lived for 10 years on the Gold Coast. I have 2 children, 2 girls who are 1 and 3. And I'm also strangely interested in crafting. I also run craft workshops, but also more recently do a lot of crafting with my 3-year-old, which is not my finest work, but is really fun. So in summary, hopefully I've been able to explain to you who I am through talking about my clinical experience, my academic experience, my management experience, and also who I am personally. What do we think? Any comments? I'd love some feedback.
I'm having trouble picturing myself being able to do a answer of that kind of standard. It was really good.
Do you think I might have practiced that before though? And I've got a slide. It's written on a slide.
Yeah. It's a hard act to follow.
But hopefully what you're seeing, thank you guys, see how kind everyone is to each other. This is why it's such a safe space. No one's picking me apart. But hopefully what I really showed is just really separating these things. This is what I'm going to tell you about. I hope for you guys it was really easy to follow, and perhaps I should have removed the slide, but I tried to pause in between what I was talking about. I tried to really tell them where I was going and tried to give examples. I don't want my answer to blow out too long, but I tried to give examples. Somebody might not have heard what a medical education officer is. So the fact that I could explain that I've been part of simulation, but also junior doctor wellbeing might explain my job. So you guys haven't had a chance to practice this. You haven't had a chance to do a nice, beautiful slide for me. So please understand that this is a really safe space, and I do not expect you to do that, even though a lot of you will probably do even better than that. But, you know, I've practiced that. I've had that prepared. So I would love a volunteer, and if I don't get one, it's okay because I've got all your names in front of me. Who would like to give it a go? Yay, who can I see? Is that Rose? Yay, Rose. Yes. Thank you. I would love another. Yeah, if you go now, you don't have to go later, hey?
That's right, yeah.
When I get to like conflict and clever. I'd love to hear this from 2 people actually. So I'm going to hear Rose, and other people can think about, oh, Sarah, good job. Now you're all going to like try and put your hand up for the easy ones, hey? So I can just go back a slide. And what I would love is some comments from everyone in the chat box. Really think about what Rose is saying, and then we're going to think about what Sarah's saying. Anything at all that we can feedback to all our classmates, I guess, and help them to do an even better job is going to be super helpful. That's what we're here for. So Rose, thank you so much for joining me on this interview today. We are interviewing heaps of people today. In fact, I've got 8 really great candidates online. So why should we pick you?
Well, first of all, I'd like to talk to you about myself in a clinical, academic, management, and then finally in my personal aspects in regards to this position. Clinically, I have extensive clinical experience. I've got 3 years in pediatrics, 3 years in emergency medicine, and additionally 4 years in general practice. Whilst in these clinical areas, I have had a lot of experience working with very vastly different patient populations, and I am quite comfortable working with pretty much anyone that comes my way. That includes people of culturally and linguistically different diverse backgrounds. I am from the southwest of Sydney, so I did grow up around a lot of different cultures. I've also had a lot of experience in very small, remote, rural communities with a high Indigenous population. From the academic front, I've had experience doing research, contributing to research projects in the hospitals. I've had 1 publication from my honours year as a med student. I've run a critical care journal club as a junior doctor. And I've also done a fair bit of teaching. In my last role as a GP, I've been a clinical academic for the GP registrars, the medical students, and I often conduct teaching on the run with the GP registrars in our clinic. From a management point of view, as I've progressed through the years, I have had increasing experience with managing people. So not only junior doctors, but also various allied health and nursing staff. Specifically, managing some of the staff in the general practice that I work with, directing individual nurses on the day to particular tasks, in summary. And personally, I do enjoy the outdoors, and really hope in the next 5 years that I can make it to the Galapagos Islands.
And now do you feel really awkward and I'm still looking at you?
Yes. Oh, and in summary, I actually don't really know how to... So in summary, that is my clinical, I don't really know, clinical, academic and management and personal summary of myself. Yeah.
Yeah. And that would have felt awkward doing it just now because I reminded you to do it. But if you just lead on to in summary, and you can even say something like, in summary, I do feel like I've got a lot to bring. And hopefully I've outlined for you today my clinical, academic, management and personal experience. Yeah.
I like that phrase.
Doesn't add anything on, no content, but it really wraps it up. And it moves your communication score across. Like there's evidence to show if you do a really great motherhood statement, great in summary statement, your overall communication score will be higher, even though there's no new content there. So really good. Well done. Thank you so much for putting your hand up. I'm just going to be quick with the feedback because I want you to get it, and I also want it to apply to everyone, but I want to cover so much more too. So thank you for breaking down your clinical experience into 3 years, 3 years, and 4 years. That was brilliant. That's a really great chunk of time in each of those areas. So I think we need to highlight it. If you say 10 years or 12 years, we will just panel will think, oh, yeah, she's done like 5 months here and she's just trying to hide that with this 9 years somewhere else. That was really good. How clever that you brought in the culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Very clever. Interview panels, love that. That's, that one of those buzzwords that if you can get it in, you should. So that was really very clever and true. And then you brought it back to where you lived in Sydney. When you talked about the small remote communities that you've lived in and worked in, I really wanted you to say, for example. So, Ulladulla, for example, because, you just never know what's going to pull on the heartstrings of somebody. It might be that they've been there or that their sister's brother's dog's mother lived there. Maybe they've never heard of it, and that's okay too. But I think if you can say, for example, it only adds 3 seconds to your answer, but it just really you're going specific there.
Yeah.
For example, the Ulladulla, which has a population of 400, I don't know, that will just show it. Yeah, show it even more so. I loved your specific stuff about the research, the critical care journal club that you did as a junior.
That's it.
And, you're pulling this back from years ago, but that's still really important. It says a lot about who you are. You haven't, leopards don't change their spots all these years later. So that was really clever.
It did worry me because it's also old if I should still be bringing it up or
I
they want something new.
Things like that are really, they just show a lot about your character. So I think, you're just using it as a small example. I wouldn't use it if they said to you, if the whole question was tell us about, your research experience, I wouldn't expect you to blow that out to 3 minutes and talk about it like it's your biggest achievement ever. But I think it's really good as a small example packed within a question. Yeah. Outdoors was great. Galapagos Islands was great. Train the trainer. I wanted to know if you're a trained train the trainer person. You know the train the trainer program?
No, I don't.
Oh, there is a train the trainer program. If anyone's done any of these programs or you're delivering education and you're trained in it, just mention that you're trained in it. But so what you said was perfect for you. I wondered, it made me wonder if you'd done it. Don't give up an opportunity to tell them if you have. So thank you. That was so great. We're going to hear from Sarah now. So Sarah, next cat off the rank. Hopefully where are you? Just popping up on my screen. Olivia, Linda. Sarah, great.
Hello.
So Sarah, dermatology is a really hard training program to get onto. Why should it is?
Well, I believe I have a lot to offer to the Dermatology College as a trainee and then eventually as a fellow. And I'll break that down into the general domains of clinical, academic, management and personal, sections. To start off with, clinically, I am PGY 4 after graduating from medical school in 2017. I have a total of 8 months experience working full-time in dermatology as an unaccredited registrar, initially a short amount of time relieving in that position as a PGY2, and I started in that position again in March this year at a tertiary hospital. And I have been participating in outpatient clinical reviews of patients, inpatient management of dermatology patients, general dermatology procedures, and also in the on-call roster. Additionally, my experience in dermatology actually started when I went to Groningen in the Netherlands as a final year elective for 4 weeks, which I'd organised to go over as part of my medical specialties rotation. And that's where I really fell in love with dermatology as a specialty. I also have clinical experience as a basic physician trainee, which I did last year, and there was actually a lot of dermatology in that year. My favourite, I think, has to be when I was asked to do a punch biopsy as a stroke advanced trainee, relieving for a day. That was probably the one thing I could do when there were 5 other stroke calls earlier that morning. Secondly, from an academic point of view, I am an associate lecturer through University of Queensland, which acknowledges the teaching I've done in terms of medical student education, both formally as part of their clinical coaching program and informally when medical students are attached to our teams. I am an author and a peer reviewer for an online medical student program called eMedici, and I contribute to their dermatology content. I'm actively involved in research. The most recent publication I had accepted was a letter to the editor in the Journal of the American Academy of Dermatology in response to a CME article on field cancerization and particularly field radiation treatment. And my sort of current research project that I'm doing as part of my Master of Public Health up in Townsville with James Cook University is to investigate the photoprotective behaviours of grassroots netball players, which is something that's quite dear to my heart. In terms of management, I have experience in management of multidisciplinary teams in my work, clinical work as a doctor. I have experience management outside of work also in the netball teams I've been involved in. I suppose back clinically, I have also, as part of a physician trainee, had to lead medical emergency calls. And as I've gone through the ranks and gotten further away from my medical school graduation, I've taken on management of junior medical staff predominantly as well. On a personal note, I have a broad range of extracurricular interests, which I think makes me an interesting person to work with. I play netball in the State League and have done so for 10 years. I also sing in a choir, and we have done some pretty cool gigs. I've been over to France twice representing Australia at the Anzac Centenary Commemoration Services. We also did the Commonwealth Games a couple of years ago at the Gold Coast. And I think altogether my experience outside of work contributes to my skills in teamwork, leadership, and also resilience and work-life balance. My overall aim, obviously, I want to become a dermatologist. I'd like to work in public hospital medicine, and I'm passionate about public hospital medicine, and also in terms of public health as well, which I've been learning a lot more about with my master's. I want to continue to engage in teaching medical students, residents, continue to work in the research, particularly clinical research fields, and then finally to balance my career in dermatology with my other extracurricular interests.
Great. What do we think? Let me go back to the other. Actually, make me go back to the other screen. I didn't look back at the chat box to see if anyone's been writing in there for the both of you. Oh, no, they haven't. Oh, no, they haven't. Great. Now I can't see anyone, but I'm sure you're all there. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Ash. Well done. So I wish that we were in a normal room and I could say, what does everyone think? But I think that you did a great job. What I would love, and I wish that I had done it, is to time you there, Sarah.
Yeah.
So I feel like you have got, what you sort of did was talk about why dermatology and why you, and also I think you talked about where you want to go. And they're all, the issue is with you is they're all really good answers, but you've got to be really selective about what you get across. So I want you to practice that. And I think in dermatology, you're going to get asked all of those questions separately, which is great. So you want to have it.
I've been thinking about them.
Yeah, it's brilliant, brilliant. Such a good answer. So I want you to time yourself. Lots of things that I loved. The specific examples that you gave, I loved. If your answer blows out too far, what you just need to do is come back to one of those examples rather than giving two examples. But be specific about the one example that you give. That was really, really great. You know, you're beautiful, like both of you, beautiful, telling me like now academic stuff, now personal stuff. That was really good. When you said tertiary hospital at the start, say where, you know, tertiary hospital, say the hospital and then where, because again, you're building this connection. Somebody might have worked there, especially in the medical world. Hey, we've all worked everywhere, or we know somebody who has. So I think say where. Love breaking down teaching into formally and informally. It's a beautiful way to answer an interview question, to talk about formal stuff and then informal stuff. So that was really clear. One thing that I really liked that you did is you didn't call that journal JAAD. You called it Journal of whatever it was. Whenever you use acronyms, even in interviews, make sure you say it out fully, everyone, not just like JA, you know, the JAD or the, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then it kind of makes people who don't know what that is think like, well, I don't know what that stands for. So it was really good that you said that out in full. But I reckon your main thing is you need to decide where you're going and commit to it, and don't try and bring in your other great answers into one question. You can bring them in a little bit. Like the passionate thing about the Netherlands was really good, but then you got to try and stop yourself and wait for when they get there. So I can. Oh, great, Rose! I can know comments Sarah made.
Can I just point out, there was a couple there that I think would work for anyone in an interview. If they, particularly one phrase that Sarah used, contributes to my resilience and work-life balance. I think if I feel if an interview panel heard that, they would just be like, we need her.
Tick, tick. Yeah,
tick,
absolutely. Yeah. Such a night. Yeah. And I want you to steal phrases from each other. I think we're really lucky that we're all applying for different jobs here too. Sometimes it's awkward when there's, 4 people applying for the same job in the room. But, even if there was, we could get away with that. But it's so great that you're all applying for different jobs. And one of the brilliant, I can tell you what to say, but hearing your colleagues within this group say it and borrowing their phrases, write it out word for word, always have a pen. And I'll try and pick out those phrases too. But I totally agree. That was brilliant. And everyone can use that. Everyone can use that. And I'll try and pick out all of those things. Does anyone else want to go? I can't see everyone. I can just see me now. So maybe speak up. Would anyone else like to go of that one before we move on? I'm happy to feed any burning desires. I can't see anyone. Oh, my screen is only showing me, but I can hear everyone. I'm sure Ashley's
I think I've mucked something up here, so I'll just be playing around with it to try and get everyone back on screen. Everyone's here, but I've somehow put them in a different separate box.
No worries. Well, if anyone wants to have a go, unmute yourself and say, me, please.
Can you see everyone now, Brooke?
I can see everyone. I just can't see slides.
Did you want to go back to slides?
Yeah, we can go back now. That's great, unless anyone wants to speak up.
I might actually.
Yay! Who's that? I can't see who that is.
Okay.
Is it Mariko?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. All right, so we'll do you.
Get my pet away from begging at my feet so that I'm not distracted.
Is it a pet? See, now I'm connected with you because you have a pet, even though I don't even have a pet. This is like
I have two, and they've been gathering around my feet as I've been doing things. So.
Awesome. So maybe let's all try and think about a phrase that she uses or something really good that she says that you're going to steal, okay? This is the beauty in hearing other people's answers. So we are interviewing a lot of people today for the Psych Train program in South Australia. Why should we pick you?
Okay, well, I think that I have a lot to bring to the training program today, which I'll try and explain to you in different categories. So first being clinical, then my academic work, my management experience, and who I am as a person. So clinically, I have experience in psychiatry working as an intern at John Cade, and then 6 months of RMO work at Ballarat Health Service, where the service didn't have registrars, so RMOs did all of the on-call and admissions like a registrar would. And since then, I've done 3 years of locum psychiatry work as a registrar in various different roles all across the country. So I have worked in multiple different inpatient units. I've done emergency psychiatry, consultation liaison, and then working on two different community crisis teams. At the moment, I'm working with a new service that's just been started up, so getting new challenges of working into the system. Academically, I organised a lecture series when I was in medical school to cover topics that weren't covered as part of the core curriculum, and coordinated other students to prepare and get everyone involved in that to help us all study for our exams during the year. I also participated in the neuroscience teaching program, teaching the earlier years some of the topics that we'd covered. Since then, I've had less opportunities to do formal teaching work because of my locum roles, but I have really enjoyed the kind of ad hoc opportunities to teach medical students and supervise junior medical staff during that, and that's something that I'd really like to get involved in once I am in training and have a bit more of a stable employment to be able to get involved formally. With management experience, I actually have some management experience from before medicine. I was a store manager in retail prior to starting my medical degree back at the age of 21, so quite a while ago, and did most of a business degree before transferring to medicine. So some of those skills really easily translate over into what I'm doing. In my current role, because it is a new service, I was actually employed by the director as a locum because of my experience as an RMO and him remembering me from that time to come in and take a much more management focused role, even though I'm working as a registrar. So I work very closely with the team leader for both the acute crisis team and access and triage to provide clinical oversight, as well as working with processes and negotiating where we fit in the broader service and how we can most contribute to the service as a team. Personally, I really like, which is why I chose to locum for a little while before starting training. I'm on my own, so it's been very nice travelling around. Unfortunately, COVID changed that situation a little bit. And I also do quite a lot of committee work with with ALMA, which is a group of same-sex attracted women in Australia and New Zealand. We're delegates to the United Nations on issues related to sexual orientation and gender identity, and contribute to the conversation in Australia around those issues as well. So at the moment, I'm a co-convener, but and so running the organisation, but I have been involved since I was a medical student in some capacity on the committee. So in summary, I think I have a lot to bring to the training program in various areas.
I think the end of your sentence just cut out then. Can you hear me? Oh, we might have lost her. We can talk about her now. She did a pretty good job though. Can you hear us?
I think she's just frozen.
Okay. She might come back online shortly, hey?
Yeah.
I'll pick out a few things for everyone else's learning. So when Mirko was talking about organising the lecture series, is she there? I can't see. I don't know if she can hear this feedback. It doesn't matter though. I can tell her later. I think that was, something different that was unusual. I was left wondering what type of things weren't covered in the curriculum that she had to then be part of organising. Maybe you guys were thinking the same too. So maybe giving an example of one of those things that was covered in this lecture series, and also talking about how many lectures are we talking about. So what she just said about organising a lecture series, it could be that she organised a lecture series of 3 lectures, or it could have been that she organised a lecture series of 25 lectures. So if the number is good, say the number, and normally the number is good. 5 might be impressive. 5 is still impressive to me that this is stuff that wasn't covered in the curriculum. What's even more impressive is an example of that. When Mirko was talking about her informal teaching experience, sometimes a good way that you guys can show that you are good at this without saying, I'm kind of good at that, is by talking about some feedback that somebody gave you. So Mirko could have reflected on an example of teaching that she did last week where the junior doctor or nurse or whoever it was that she was teaching gave her some specific feedback, and you can talk about what that feedback is, just a little bit, but it's often a really nice way for you not to have to blow wind up your own skirt by talking about the feedback that somebody else gave you. That's a really good tip for when you're trying to talk good about yourself, which you're doing through the whole interview. So what we're going to move on to now, I don't think Mirko is back on, but thank you so much to her for doing that. What we're going to move on to now is, Ashley, if you can...
I'm back in.
She's just rejoined.
Oh, we just talked
about...
I
don't know what happened. Did you guys actually hear that?
We heard all of it except like the second half of your in-summary statement, which we knew because we've heard it. So okay, that was really good. I might just pop my thoughts in an email tonight to you because we just talked about... I just talked so much about what we loved about your answer and what you did really well and a few pointers. So I'll just quickly pop them in an email to you so you don't miss out. But really great job. Thank you so much. Sorry you cut out at that. Before the clincher of the movie. So overall, we've been talking good about you. Don't worry. What we're going to do for the last 25 minutes of tonight is I would like to just start to think about where we're going with the next type of question. We're not going to cover that tonight as far as you guys having a go, but what we're going to do is have I've got a video for you to watch of somebody else answering a behavioural question, and I'd actually like you to think about what score you would give them. So what score, I want you all to decide a score that you would give them out of 10 if you were on the interview panel. And I want you, of course, to think about what she did well and what she didn't do well. So this is somebody who applied for the obstetrics and gynecology training program last year and was successful in the training program. She then kindly let me videotape her answering a question so that I could use it for workshops like this. So behavioural questions, remember, are those ones where you get to share an example. These are the best type of questions for interviewers to ask you, because what it does is it allows you to talk about something that you've done before. And what we know is that past behaviours usually are a very good indicator of future performance. So you guys should... Yeah. Hey, Hannah. Oh, hey. Does somebody have a question? No, great. I think everyone can see the slides. Brilliant. So what I am going to now do is share. I'm just going to share a video where I'm asking this doctor a question, and I want you all to give her a score out of 10 and make some notes about what goes well and what doesn't. So I'm going to share screen and then make her big. I'm just going to make it big enough that you can all see it. Hopefully you can all see her. Is that right? Turn your sound up. And I'm about to press play. Ashley, is that all looking good at your end?
It's still just loading, Brooke.
I haven't pressed play yet.
Yeah, no, we can't. It's just saying screen loading, so it hasn't yet caught up.
Okay, I'll just wait.
Yes, Hannah, you can't see slides on the phone, I don't think. So you should still be able to hear it, yes, and we'll send you the recording tomorrow. Brookie, it's still saying screen loading, so you might want to just check on your end if it's working. Is she up on your screen?
Yeah. Oh,
Can anyone...
Hang on. Share.
Oh, there we go. Something's happening.
Yeah, I think it was. And then if I move her in front. Sorry, everyone. Okay, can you see now?
Yep, can see her okay now.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to press play. Just let me know in 5 seconds if it's not seeming to be working, Ash.
We can see your entire desktop as well, which is okay.
I'll start the time that you made a mistake. When I was working as a resident, and lost about 2 litres of blood at delivery. So my role was to put in a camera and take blood and to send them. So I sent a full blood count and group and hold to the lab, but I hadn't labelled the group and hold and checked and written the patient details in handwriting, which you need for it to be valid. So then there was a delay and had to retake her bloods so that we could get a cross match and give her some blood. This does happen quite commonly, unfortunately, and I've learned from this. It can be very important for patient safety, especially for the patient experience, because she needed to have another venipuncture and blood sent. So I've made sure that now when I'm in that situation, if I'm taking bloods, I take 10 seconds to check the label and check whether I've labelled it correctly, and if there's someone free to also check. So there's that double check before we send it off. I think that's very important, taking that 10 seconds even in an emergency, because it can save 10 minutes and also improve the patient experience. Great, thank you. So it sounds like that was okay, but I'm just going to play it once more. Is that right, everyone? Is that right, Ash? Did everyone hear that? Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Ash. So I'm going to just play again. Hopefully everyone's got their microphones up. It's quite short, her response. That might be some feedback. So let's all have a go at listening to her. So tell us about a time that you made a mistake. The next question for today's interview is, could you tell us about a time that you've made a mistake? Okay. When I was working as a resident in obstetrics, I was responsible for attending all the MET calls and went to a postpartum hemorrhage for a woman who had delivered and lost about 2 litres of blood at delivery. So my role was to put in a cannula and take bloods and to send them. So I sent a full blood count and group and hold to the lab, but I hadn't labelled the group and hold and checked and written the patient details in handwriting, which you need for it to be valid. So then there was a delay and I had to retake her bloods. We could get across that and give her some blood. This does happen quite commonly, unfortunately, and I've learned from this. It can be very important for patient safety, especially for the patient experience, because she needed to have another venipuncture and blood sent.
So I've made sure that now when I'm in that situation, if I'm taking bloods, I take 10 seconds to check the label and check whether I've labelled it correctly. And if there's someone free to also check, so there's that double check before we send it off. I think that's very important, just taking that 10 seconds, even in an emergency, because it can save 10 minutes and also improve the patient experience. Great. Thank you.
All right, so I'm just going to close that. So let's get our chat boxes working, everyone. Let me go back to PowerPoint. So what do we think? I can move. Thank you for typing. So I'd love everyone to type in what they're going to give her out of 10. She's already on to her next question, so you already have to have made a decision as a panel member. How many? 7 out of 10, great. And let's give some qualitative feedback as well. So Ash, I would have liked to have heard no harm came to the patient that she didn't mention, but she did answer very well. I think that's good to hear, everyone. 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10. Anyone but Ash got any specific feedback? Sarah, nice and succinct. Concise example is good. Olivia? So she expanded beyond the clinical aspects of the error to the patient experience. Excellent, I agree. And there's often a mark on the criteria for patient-centeredness. Acknowledge the error and what she learned from it to prevent it from happening again. Strategies to address the problem on departmental level and risk man. Yes, interview panels love hearing about documenting errors to try and prevent them from happening to more patients. Spoke about 10 seconds saving much more time due to error, so like 10 seconds saving 10 minutes. Yeah, brilliant. So there was, that answer was like a minute 16 or something, a minute 10, and there was lots in it. I also think, what do you think about the risk level of the error? So did she pick, it was sort of low risk. Yeah. So if you're thinking about like a risk consequence matrix of like, what's the risk to the patients and how big's the consequence likely to be, this was a low risk, which is a really good way to think about it. You don't want to appear vibe. You don't want to, so low and common. You want to pick something that's low that people can relate to, not something crazy, where, that might have the panel being a bit worried or startled. And you really do need to have a mistake or an error ready to go. Would anyone like to share any mistake that they've made to see about whether it might be a great example to use in an interview? Yes, Ash, I think it's a pretty common question. I wouldn't put my money on that you'll be asked it, but I think you will. I would put my money on that you will be asked about conflict or a mistake or error. That's very commonly asked, one of those two. And people often find mistakes hard to pick. This is one that you do want to have ready up your sleeve, because if you're asked on the spot, it's quite hard to think of a mistake, I find. I can just see me, so I can't see anyone's hands up or anything. But would anyone just like to share with the group what mistake they might give? Here's everyone. I can see people's faces again now.
Did you want us to just talk or put it in the chat box? I've lost the chat box.
Who's that? Is that Rose?
Oh, it's Rose. It's Rose.
Tell me a mistake, Rose. And you don't have to play. Just tell me about your mistake.
That's okay. As a junior doctor, I once ordered a barium swallow on the wrong patient. That was as a result of having multiple patient files open, but also being constantly interrupted in the middle of tasks by nursing staff because I was on the ward at the time. I don't think there was much harm to a patient from a barium swallow, but I did communicate the mistake to the patient and their family. And and to the nursing staff, of course, and the seniors, and it was documented. So I don't know if that's something that you could mention, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's like a low risk type thing.
Yeah.
I think you should really, and you might even need to revisit it and think about, like, look up what are, if the risks are minor or not at all to the patient, what are they? Because it's a really good opportunity for you to explain that you really know and you looked into the risk. Like, I've made mistakes as a pharmacist, and I remember the feedback my mentor gave me at the time was to really, okay, the patient hasn't even taken the incorrectly dispensed tablet, but what would have happened if they did, and what could you do to then sort them out? So just really being clear that you know the consequences, you know how to deal with it. You said something really great then, but there's a really great way, there's a nice buzz interview word to say it. So you were just talking about how you spoke to the patient. What's that called? What would be a lovely, who wants to jump in? What's that called, and would be a great buzzword or two buzzwords to say in an interview when you tell a patient about something?
Open disclosure.
Wow.
Yay! Open disclosure. So introducing the next word that's a really good one to say in an interview is open disclosure. There's not that many of these types of words. You said one earlier. Well, you said one of those themes earlier with the linguistically and culturally diverse groups. That's a really great thing to throw in. Another one is open disclosure. That's a really great thing. And people often talk about that they spoke to the patients, but they don't call it open disclosure. And you'll probably get a few extra brownie points if you actually call it open disclosure.
Okay.
Can I give an example of something I did incorrectly or wrong, which I was able to use in an interview? When I was a junior doctor, I was on neurosurgery, and I was incredibly organised, and one of our patients had a subdural or something, and we were just conservatively managing them, but we were doing a repeat CT scan on Monday to assess whether the patient needed to go to theatre or not based on whether their bleed was extending or not. I was so organised that I put in all my paperwork to be done and the request to be done early. And I got a phone call Sunday at 2 p.m. when I was at a wedding in Melbourne and when I was working on the Gold Coast from the radiologist saying, hi, RMO for neurosurgery. You requested this CT scan on this date, which was Sunday. So I put the incorrect date in. And yes, they have significantly extensive bleed, which is worsening, and, you know, they need to go to theatre. So my mistake was... Well,
that was a clever mistake.
No, yes and no. It could have waited 24 hours, but what it meant is that I got to talk about this mistake and then talk about the clinical fallout from it, but also the fact that the team wasn't the normal team on the weekend. So a different surgeon had to operate and their boss had to get called in. So then I got to start talking about communication and teamwork and not the regular continuity of care and stuff like that. Yeah. So using that mistake as a way of being able to bring that all in. So it worked out okay in the end, but I'll never forget that mistake.
Yeah. And as you said, Ash, it was a way to introduce other skills that you had and other things that you understand. So it's quite clever. Sometimes you'll talk about a mistake. Think back to your best cards and things that you've done, and sometimes you'll pick a mistake from that. So not only are you telling them about this low-risk mistake, but it also happened to be while you were doing this research project or getting this 7 months experience in anaesthetics, or, you know, it's like a way to sneakily, but not sneaky because it's totally okay. That's what interviews are for. Tell them something else about you. Yeah, really good. So I want you all to try and think about a mistake, try and think of a low-risk type mistake that you can present. And what we're going to talk about next week is the frameworks, and we're going to really practice how you use those frameworks when you're delivering examples. I've got a little bit, before we move on to that, I just want to show you, so we watched Dale, which was the girl's name. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes here. So can everyone just have a look at those positive indicators? This is exactly what a marking criteria might look like for that question. So just have a look through. And think about whether you'd still give her a 7 or an 8, or if looking at this changes your answer. Oh, Sarah. Mm-hmm. Any comments about seeing that would we that marking criteria? Would we still give her a 7 or 8, or do we now think she missed more important things than we did before? I want to hear from somebody I haven't heard from. Linda or Marwin, you're on the left of my screen. Do you want to unmute yourselves and tell me what you think?
Yes, thank you, Ash. So yeah, obviously when we're looking at the marking sheet that we have, as you said, the open disclosure is one of the very important points to raise. In addition, there was not much of stress on her explanation to the open disclosure, not to the patient only, but even to the supervisor, as they have stated here. And there was not much of a mention of communication relating to the open disclosure, but I'm not sure why they have stressfully, talked about open disclosure. I would think they would just give it 1 point in the marking. And yeah, so I think with the overall rating the criteria, we would give perhaps 5 out of 10.
Yeah.
That's what I think the case is.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Linda, do you want to add anything to that, seeing as I have you on the left of my screen as well?
Yeah, just looking at the criteria, like there's few things like towards the end, like documentation, but I felt she covered a lot of the points. So, and it was very well structured. Perhaps documentation and perhaps like formally sort of reporting it, although it wasn't a severe enough issue, to formally report. But I felt it sort of addressed a lot of the criteria.
Yeah. So I think everyone sort of meets criteria, slightly above criteria. Once you put a marking, I guess the point of that activity is once you put a marking sheet in front of people, some people get pickier. Some people, like Linda, are still pretty satisfied with her answer. And you might have 3 people on a panel who somebody gives it's like MasterChef. Somebody gives a 6, somebody gives a 7, somebody gives an 8, So I think it's just it's really interesting to see what a marking criteria looks like. When I'm on a panel, the section that I use most on these sheets is a section that says panel member notes. I'm not going through and like the cognitive load of me listening and trying to tick off what she's saying before she gets to the next question is high. So what I'm usually doing is writing down the key things that she says under panel member notes. If she says the words open disclosure, I would write that down. I'd probably even shorten it to OD, like that's how quick it is that you have to be marking these people. So, I think it's all about signposting. And I think she could have done a better job of that, which we'll introduce with the frameworks next week. Her story was great, though, and I think that gives you a really good benchmark for the type of low-risk error that you might want to talk about. Sarah, I've seen your comment in the chat box to say that you had a patient a few weeks ago where you'd forgotten to book the procedure, just hadn't completed the online form, and then you picked it up in a clinic. You picked it up later and it had actually disappeared. So, that's going to be such a great example that you saved the hospital some money for, not investigations or something. I think what's really important with errors is that you've reflected. Even if it was a really low risk error and nothing happened to the patient, you've reflected on what could have happened, and you've also reflected and worked out a way to change your practice to prevent that from happening before. What's even better is that you share that story. You talk in the interview about how you shared that story with other junior doctors or your colleagues, and you all brainstormed about how to best avoid missing that, putting that form in, or like Ash says, getting the date wrong or whatever. Maybe from now on you can write Sunday the 27th on the form. Whatever your solution is, that you shared that and that your solution is bigger than just you. If you can say that you chatted to people in over a coffee, and you all compared how you what systems that you have in place to not forget to put in these procedure forms, it just shows that you've got that reflection and like bigger learning. So well done, everyone. Thank you. So hopefully what you are thinking about now is behavioural questions, which is exactly where we're going to kick off next week. I have got more homework for you. I know you've thought about 1 or 2 behavioural questions from the pre-reading, but what I'm going to do is send you an email tomorrow with a little bit more homework. This is hopefully going to take you half an hour to an hour or longer if you really want to start practicing it in depth. But what I want you to start thinking about is if you are asked any of these questions, what example would you give them? So tell us about a time that you've made a mistake. Tell us about a time that you've faced conflict or had a differing opinion from a colleague. Tell us about a good team that you worked with and why it worked so well. We're going to talk about those types of questions next week. The other type of questions we're going to talk about are those facty, you should know this type questions. And they are, so I want you to start thinking about what are the key challenges facing your specialty in the next 10 years? What is the last journal article that you read and what are the key messages? What did you learn through your experience through COVID? Why have you chosen this role or this specialty? So that's lots of things to start to think about, but just consider this, you're sitting outside the interview room. They've told you that you've got 10 minutes, in this case, 1 week minus 2 hours to think about it and have a bit of a go. I will email you this so that you've got it in your email as well. But if you haven't done any of the original pre-reading, I think you'll get something out of it. So please do it. And then this is your new homework to start thinking about prior to 7 o'clock next week. What I'd love to do now is just check, has anyone got any questions, any comments? Last chance to interact before we all go to bed. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks so much, guys. I think if you work really hard for the next couple of weeks, it'll really set you in a great spot for your interviews in a little while. So thanks for joining us tonight. Let's all log on before 7 next week, just so that we're really in and ready to go at 7 and we can get the most out of the session. So if you had some trouble, especially those who had trouble with microphone, maybe just log in at 10 to Eastern Standard Time. Yeah. Is that, yeah. Perfect.
Thank you.
Night, everyone. Thanks so much.